Hey Canada, just want to do this video here. I want to start covering some of the economic realities and you know appeal to some of the people in the business community. Well, actually, you could be the owner of a business, an entrepreneur, a startup, even someone that owns an already established corporation per se, but it's a topic that really needs to be covered because, I mean, if you look around, the U.S. was the one that started this whole stimulus, this central banks and central governments working together to try to stave off, a genuine economic correction based on all the malinvestments and improper, government intervening into the marketplace. They mess everything up, and then when the situation finally reaches a critical point where corrections have to be made, well, now they're the idiots in the central banks or the crony capitalists or the crony investors or the big government. Well, they want to stave off this correction so that they can keep their little Ponzi scheme going a little longer still. But what they're recognizing is almost 7 years into the so-called recovery after the Great Recession of '08. Think about it. It's 2015 now. 7 years later. And as you can see, other than the money printing and borrowing and offloading debts onto future generations, the economies aren't growing in Western countries, and I mean there's a whole lot of underlying reasons for that. It's not just one. It's just not one off. It can't be summed up in a 30-second sound bite on your mainstream media like some people like to purport. It's much more. There's much more to it than that. But what I want to cover is the why. Because in the media, the why very seldomly ever gets talked about when you talk about any subject matter. It's all about sensationalism, but since they have no idea, no real grasp or concept on the underlying fundamentals, especially when it comes to economics, the why always gets left out. But if you look at as myself, I'm entrepreneurial at heart. I've had business before, and I consider myself to be fairly astute in economics. And I'm going to tell you, and people that I know, friends, even some extended family members, other people that I know, people that I've met in the social media, other business owners. Plus, I pay attention to, like the Financial Post and Wall Street Journal and all. I pay attention to what people are saying. I try to keep in touch with the pulse of the people and the business leaders in the world and in the business community to see what their mindset is. And what I've come to realize is, just like myself, they're completely under the same mindset, which is why central banks and central governments are saying, well, we're doing all this stuff, but there's no growth. We print trillions of dollars, and we almost beg companies to take it, this, think about how much money, just between QE1, QE2, QE3, what is it? The Federal Reserve bought up trillions of dollars. You got foreign investor. China bought up, I think, another $1.5–2 trillion. Japan's way up there. But what's happening is the reason why none of that investment, while that's not translating into real, genuine economic growth that we, the regular people, can see and feel, is because if you're a business owner or an investor, over the last 7 years, a person that understands economics realizes there has to be a clearing effect before, just like a person, if you run a business before, you run it into the ground, well, there has to be a clearing effect. You got to go through restructuring, you got to go through your bankruptcy, you got to set everything up, you got to recapitalize. There's a lot of work that has to be done before anyone wants to venture out into another business venture, and invest their hard-earned money or capital, or even borrowed capital. Before they want to do that, they want to make sure that You know, especially once you've been burnt once, you want to make sure if you're going to try it again, you want to make sure, you know, the path ahead is at least somewhat smooth, right? Well, this is the problem. Central banks and central governments have created an atmosphere because they centrally plan and manipulate not just the monetary policy, fiscal policy, regulations, and how much. I mean, look at like how many people that are anti-corporations and stuff now. They're scared to death to try to reinvest because they recognize, if there's one thing about a capitalist, is they recognize they don't want to lose out on their investments. That's what capitalism is all about. It's about making a return, profiting from your investments. If you know that there's a substantially high percentage, you know, in the betting pool that you might fail if you start reinvesting or try to build your company or your business, if you recognize that, you know, there might be some underlying structural aspects of the economy that will make that collapse as soon as you start investing your money, well, of course you're going to hold off. This is the problem, and you're not going to see any growth. This is what I want to explain to my fellow Canadians that don't understand economics and have a proper business sense. Is the business leaders in this country and in other countries, they're not going to reinvest. They're not going to recapitalize. They're not going to look to increase wages or hiring until governments get the hell out of the way. Governments and central banks and this whole Ponzi scheme they got going on, until they get out of the way, you know, clear out all the malinvestments, restructure, recapitalize, and so that you can see that, you know, at least off to the horizon where you can see that you at least are going to stand a decent chance of getting a good return on your investment in the future. Well, they're going to hold off until that situation presents itself. And that situation is not going to present itself as long as you live in this basic zero interest rate environment, Fed, you know, pumping out money. I mean, well, they've stopped the quantitative easing process for now, but because they have, you're seeing now the underlying fundamentals of the economy are showing it's showing the reality that it wasn't nearly as strong as they pretended to be, that these central planners pretended to be. Because, I mean, think about it. If you could go in the backyard and pluck from the money tree, yeah, you could. It could look to your neighbors and your local businesses or your grocery store or anywhere you would go and spend that, it would look like, hey, well, they're doing good. But you know, in reality, what it would mean is you're just plucking from that tree, and eventually that tree's going to run dry. Or if nothing is left on the tree, it might shrivel up and there'd be nothing left, and it just become, you know, an old deadwood, right? This is what's happening in the business environment. You know, there are some that are taking the risk on. But a lot of the ones that are taking the risk are the big corporations that maybe have some underlying cronyist aspect to their business venture where the government will bail them out regardless. So sure, they're willing to reinvest if the government says, hey, do this, and even if you screw up, we'll bail you out in some way, shape, or form, then or we'll recapitalize or find some way to, yeah, they might be, but your small business owners, which make up the largest portion of most employers in Canada and the U.S., they're not going to take that kind of risk. They don't have that kind of protections. They don't have that kind of safety net provided to them. If they fail, you know, they fail. So this is why you're not seeing a massive recovery, even with like the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that have been printed to stimulate the economies, not just here in Canada and the U.S., but even Europe now, they're starting to try this stuff. But it's not going to work out. It's just not going to work out because business owners, I mean, this is the thing with people in government or central planners. These are bureaucrats, people from academia. They have no business sense. They don't understand the real world, you know, and how the business mind works. So they think that they can get over these hurdles by, you know, setting record low interest rates or basically saying, hey, please borrow. The business owners, the smart, which most of them are, if you become even remotely successful, you have to be at least a somewhat smart business owner. And they're too smart to fall for this bullshit nonsense of, oh yeah, I really want to get into this Ponzi scheme now, especially when you look at now. I mean, we all know that the housing market is so massively overinflated that it's bound to crash at any time soon. You know, even with all the bullshit with the oil speculation, we know it should be way lower than it is now, but because they're using this whole contango thing and storing in offshore, big ships, the tankers, and then, down in Cushing, Oklahoma, and all these other places where you're storing all of your excess oil reserves, so it looks like, there isn't that much of a glut in the market. But the smart people know this stuff. This is the thing. I mean, you might be able to convince some lowly consumer reader in your mainstream media publications, but the business people are much smarter than you give them credit for. And you're not going to see a genuine recovery in the Canadian economy or the American economy until the malinvestments have been weeded out, there's been restructuring, and businesses could recapitalize and reinvest without having the fear of it all being washed away because of some policy set out by some central banker or central planning bureaucrat. You need to understand this stuff. And I know there's lots of business leaders and business owners in Canada that recognize this, and this is why I'm making this video. You're the audience that I predominantly want to appeal to. What I want to say to you, though, even further than that is, even though I know things are scary, things are, can get pretty crazy and wild up and down, but be smart about what you do from this point forward. Forget about keep looking to the government to bail you out and all this shit. Make sure you have good employees. Make sure you're paying your employees a good, decent wage. Forget about minimum wage. Forget about all government bullshit. Just, what these people are worth. Make sure you pay them, properly. Take care of your workforce, because that's your future. This is your future. You need these businesses to succeed, and government's not going to help you do that. You need your employees. You need your managers. You need everybody. You need your investors. You need to take care of those people. And forget about the bureaucrats that will end up screwing you over one way or the other. Don't try to dump into that cesspool. You're just going to come up smelling like shit like anyone else has ever tried. Except for maybe a few at the top. But they actually never dove in. They just told everyone else to dive in. They stood back and laughed at you while you were doing it. Regardless, if you're really smart, and especially all you great business owners, especially out in Alberta, yes, the NDP have come to power there. But that's going to be temporary. That was political posturing. That was the Albertan people sending a message to get rid of the old entrenched power structures, which is a good thing. But, do not allow cronyism. Do not allow, cheap and easy money to skewer and blur your vision. Make sure you keep your line on not just your short-term goals, but your long-term goals, and making sure you have a genuinely intelligent, intelligent workforce with good work ethics that are going to be there for you when times do come around, because they're going to come back around. This is not going to last forever. We're going to hold the governments to account, and we're going to crush a lot of bureaucrats. We're going to destroy a lot of the bullshit, central planners before we do start get back into, turning Canada into a great, prosperous, growing, flourishing economy. That's going to happen. So, keep that long-term goal in the back of your mind. Don't think of selling out now, because in the end, in the long run, you might get bit in the ass if you try that short-term game, and you'll lose out on all the long-term aspects of it, right? So, yeah. Invest in your employees. Make sure you respect and give out proper dividends to your investors. Make sure you have good, you set aside capital, not just for your fancy home or your yacht, but to recapitalize in a time when the government finally is less involved in the economy, which is going to happen. Be smart about it. Think about the future. Think about successive generations. Think about not just maintaining your business, but growing it far off into the future as well. Together we can fix our country. We just gotta get these bureaucrats, these central planners, these central banks, these monetary manipulators and policy setters. We need to get them out of the way so that we can get Canada back on being, a truly free and prosperous country. We can do it. It's Canadian Libertarian. You know I love liberty.